Hi, Sarah. How are you today?
Good. Hi, Patrick.
Hi. So I guess we're gonna talk about more USPAP stuff today. And I
We're
thought,
gonna
yeah,
try to make it as interesting as humanly possible.
yeah. So don't blame us if you don't like it. But we were just gonna walk through a couple definitions. They in the front of the book they define a couple terms that are important and are used repeatedly, and that and we'll use all the time in our work. So just thought we would just familiarize ourselves with a few of them. Um, such as, let's see here, for example, we're just going to skip around. I think, for example, they define an appraiser just as a person who's expected to perform valuation services competently.
We would hope so. Oh, also, importantly, in a manner that is independent, impartial, and objective,
There you go. There you go.
without that bias that we don't want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see here. Another term that's defined, sort of skipping around, we have, they define value as a monetary relationship between properties and those who buy, sell, or use those properties, expressed as an opinion of the worth of a property at a given time.
Mhm.
So that what that means is in an appraisal, value is always somehow qualified. It's either, it's market value or liquidation value or some kind of value, investment value,
Mhm.
fair market value, replacement value, etc.
And in a moment in time, a
In a moment in time.
specific day. So I like to think about it kind of as this big bulletin board. You're taking the push pin and you're putting it on the bulletin board, and you've got, okay, what level of the market, what day, what that effective valuation date. And so without those factors that are, pinpointing it, you don't really have what you need.
Hmm, hmm.
And then I'm gonna skip back to the beginning because I see that they have a word here that you do a lot of, appraisal review. You want to talk about appraisal review?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's like an appraisal, but you're developing an opinion about the quality of another appraiser's work, like their report or their work file or everything, and that's part of your assignment. So sometimes part of that assignment also includes sort of reappraising the properties, but it's more about sort of appraising the appraisal. Um, and so you're developing an opinion, not necessarily about the value of a property, but about the quality of another appraiser's work. Um, its level of USPAP compliance, due diligence, that sort of thing. The level of expertise in the market that's being on display, and these kind of things.
And then USPAP deals with appraisal review in much more detail later in standards 3 and 4.
That's right. Yeah, we'll get there eventually. It's maybe June 2028 or so.
But yeah, someday we'll get there.
Hmm, hmm.
Let's try hypothetical condition because this is something a lot of people get confused about hypothetical conditions.
Yeah, yeah. We should do this one in tandem, right? With extraordinary assumption.
How extraordinary.
Yeah, extraordinary assumption and hypothetical conditions. Okay. Well, hypothetical condition, right? I guess they say, we'll try to give examples here too. So it's like a hypothetical means like, it's a hypothetical. It's not true. It's hypothetical. It's something that, um, it's not true. It's not true. It's not just like something you're unsure about. It's something to not be true, that you're taking as true for purposes of your assignment. And that might sound crazy, but actually, let's say if you're doing an insurance appraisal and they want, it's part of some sort of damage claim or something like that, they might, depending on the specifics, they might want you to generate more than one type of value. And one of those assignments might be, the value in the undamaged state prior to any
Mhm.
damage, right? So that means you know it's damaged, but you're hypothetically saying if it were not damaged, it would cost XYZ, or it would be valued at that, as opposed to valuing it in its actually damaged state, if that makes sense. So it's something you're sort of hypothetically bracketing, some new situation. And that's what you're taking as true.
Even though you know it's contrary to known facts because you're looking at the remnants of this highly damaged thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that comes up a lot. That's a great example of a hypothetical condition.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and then hypothetical conditions they get. I mean, they don't. It's not. But for most of our work, we don't have any hypothetical conditions where you know it's in your toolbox. It's this thing that you can do. USPAP lets you know, makes you aware that you can do this if you need to, but it's not something that we do unless we have like one of those specific
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, things. So yeah, so you might not be using that very often, that term, but it exists if when you need it.
And when you do use it, it goes in the scope of work. And the hypothetical condition is stated and described. So it's just right there for the intended users to be able to read.
Absolutely, yeah. And the scope of work, by the way, is just the sort of type. And usually you have to describe it in detail in the report, but it's basically you're just articulating the type and the depth, the type of research and analysis that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So you're describing it, and that's if you're using a hypothetical condition, that's where you articulate that you are
And
in the scope of work.
what you just said is the actual USPAP definition. And the way I like to think about it in the vernacular for me is it's sort of the recipe for the appraisal report. So it's okay, here's the recipe I used, here are the ingredients, and then now you get into the appraisal report.
That's right. That's right. So it's kind of yeah, it's a recipe. Um, and the hypothetical condition, it gets a little confused. Sometimes people get it. Sometimes it gets confused with an extraordinary assumption. And an extraordinary assumption is something that gets used all the time or should get used all the time. And what that is, it's again, it's something that's instead of being hypothetical, it's just uncertain at a certain time. It's something. So, for example, if you now we use this all the time. There's, if we're going on site to, document all the stuff in someone's house, and there's a painting, a framed, like, maybe watercolor or painting on the wall, and we take a picture of the verso, take it off, but it's covered in paper, and we're not inspecting the actual physical work. We're looking at it behind glass in a framed situation. So we're using, in a way, we're kind of using an extraordinary assumption that the back of, if you want to be, strictly speaking, we're using an extraordinary assumption that the condition of that artwork that we're not able to see in the areas that we're not able to see is still, we're assuming it's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where in reality, if down the road the client reframes it, they might find has 50-year-old masking tape all over the back underneath the mat, has matte burn that hadn't come out to be visible for, out in the site image, something like that. So we don't know that because we're not actually taking all the nails out of it and unframing it, which would pose a much greater risk to the artwork. So it's not really practical. But because of that, we're using that extraordinary assumption. And so the really big difference to remember is the hypothetical condition is something that's known to be false. Like this painting is burned up. It's not in great condition versus the extraordinary assumption, it looks good. It's probably good. If it were unframed in the future, maybe it's not good.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a tool. It's another tool to kind of cover yourself. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, you did not take the paper off the back of this framed artwork, so you didn't get to look up close and personal at one part of it. So it's just something you disclose to sort of, um, you know, It's a tool you can use in that kind of disclosure
Yeah.
that sort of helps you be USPAP compliant. So that's
Hmm.
good.
And that goes in the scope of work as well.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. And anything else here you want to talk about?
Well, we should say, I want to say, oh, an intended, well, at least two other things. An intended use. Intended use. It's what you're writing this report, you're reporting your appraisal, in some way, shape, or form, either in writing or usually in writing. It's what that is going to be used for, right? Is it going to be used to figure out, you know, insurance purposes, like to figure out coverage? It's going to be used by, like attorneys and courts for, state and probate sort of things. It's the intended use of that, or is it just for the client's own
Personal interest, curiosity.
personal interests and gi- giggles? Then that's, what would be a good, how would we officially, what would we call a report like that? We'd call it, fair market value for estate
Yeah.
planning purposes or something.
Yeah. Often people, might be thinking about selling in the future, planned future sale purposes. Depending on what it is, sometimes they really don't need an appraisal report for that. But yeah, estate planning, that's a common one for that sort of thing.
Hmm. Or one thing you'll hear about a lot, supposedly in the sort of art lending world. And so when people are sort of lending against art, they'll need an appraisal. They're interested in getting marketable cash value, right? So
Yeah,
that's kind of like supposedly fair market value minus expenses, whatever expense it costs to like get it to market. Um, so that's, yeah. So that's apparently that's one
yeah,
another
exactly.
intended use for
Yeah,
loan purposes.
financial collateral, exactly. And oh, and I want to bring up his client
There you
because there's sometimes some confusion about this too. So USPAP defines the client as the party or parties who engage the appraiser by employment or contract in a specific assignment, whether directly or through an agent. And so client is who's paying us, or hopefully they're going to be paying us. And that's sometimes different than the owner of the property that's being
go. Mhm.
appraised. So that's a little distinction that can be confusing. Like often in an estate, the tangible personal property that's being appraised is the owner's the estate, but the client is sometimes a personal representative or an executor or a family member. And so there's a difference in that certain appraisal assignments between the client, i.e., who's writing that check, and the owner of the property.
Absolutely, yeah. So like another example when the client might not be the owner is, for example, if you have children of, like, say the owner is like, elderly, and children are thinking ahead about, equitable distribution of the estate. So maybe it's one of the children that engages you as the client, even though they don't yet own the property.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that also gets noted in the scope of work.
Right. Yes.
Anything else
Um,
we covered?
I think, well, I want to mention also jurisdictional exception. There's a whole lot, there's a whole rule on that, but it's basically what the jurisdictional exception means. I guess when they wrote USPAP, they realized that this pertains much more to real estate. There might be, depending on where you are and where you're doing your appraisal, there might be some kind of law or regulation or municipal procedure or something where you are that prevents you from complying with some part of USPAP. I can't really think. I'm not sure I can think of a good what that might
Personal
be.
property example. Yeah.
Right, I'm not sure. But what it means is like when something is preventing you from being able to do something that you're supposed to do according to USPAP, that it means that you still have to do all the other. It doesn't throw all of USPAP out the window. It
Mhm.
just means that you get sort of an excuse for not doing that one part that came into conflict.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that tends to be more of a real estate thing, but it's good to know about. And it's a whole rule that, maybe
Right.
2029 we'll get to that one.
Right. Like what's it like, for example, this could be kind of silly. This popped up. Like, I guess you could there's nothing preventing this from happening. And stranger things are happening in the United States in 2025. But what if, there's like a county somewhere and they decide they're outlawing digital photography. So you don't so you're not I don't know. So you're not allowed to take images. All you have is a digital camera. You can't take images of whatever painting that you're doing or something like that. It's against the law. So it's like a way like to be like, okay, well then there's no digital images. I couldn't get a Kodak film in time. It's this jurisdictional exception would allow you to do that kind of thing. Sounds
And then you would cite whatever local, you know, thing that is now the jurisdictional exception. Exactly. Great example. Yeah. Stranger
right.
things have happened.
Oh, personal inspection. We should do this one, I
Oh
think.
yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
that's a good point.
that's a it's basically the appraiser's in-person observation of a property. And it's supposed to be performed as part of the scope of work. Um, and let's see. But some types of property might require special equipment, right? Like if you're like because usually the inspection is limited to what's readily observable, but that changes depending on the nature of the specific property in question. So, for example, like gems or jewelry appraisers, it's basically expected that you would look at it closely through a loop and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Uh,
things like diamonds can require specialized equipment.
right, exactly. So it's all about what's your peers, expert peers would do
Hmm.
to do an adequate examination.
And also, there are some intended uses where a personal inspection isn't required or isn't necessary in order to have confidence with it.
Yeah. I think that there's ways. I think that we'll keep finding out more. But when you can't see it physically in person, that still inspecting photographs still kind of counts as an in-person observation. Um, and I remember people talking a lot about that during COVID. But I mean, USPAP doesn't mean you have to physically doesn't it never says that you have to physically do that. It might be different for real estate.
Yeah,
But I
it
think
may indeed be different for real estate, but for personal property, yeah, that is not, in many instances, that's not necessary.
yeah. Well, you would call it another thing they'll discuss deeper in USPAP, but it's not a term that's defined here is limiting condition. So it might just be a limiting condition. It's kind of another tool you have that you didn't see it physically, but that you only looked at it through um, photographs.
Hmm.
And as long as it doesn't, as long as in your professional opinion, it doesn't throw credibility out the window to proceed like that, um, then you're fine with that.
Hmm. And in like, for example, an insurance damage claim, we've had instances where the item doesn't even exist anymore. Like it's gone. It's so
Mm,
damaged, it's gone. And so you really can't inspect it in person then because there's nothing to inspect.
exactly. So that's the wonderful world of USPAP definitions. Yeah.